gentlemen, as a narrated attraction to this great circus.
I don't know, but I've been told T-bone dance won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project. And yes, you have tuned in to the radio tower. This is the great crossover episode for the Long Island History Project. It is also actually our 150th. I almost missed that. Welcome. I am Chris Kretz. I am your host for both shows, so I am crossing over with myself. But returning today is our own Connie Currie. For the Long Island History Project, our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band, and you can find all of our past episodes at longislandhistoryproject.org. The Radio Tower is the official podcast of the Long Island Radio and Television Historical Society. You can find us at LIRTVHS.org/podcasts. For some ancient history, the Long Island History Project started out as a podcast funded by the Society and the Dowling College Library. Dowling College no longer exists, and we spun off the Radio Tower as the radio history-specific podcast. I produce Long Island History Project independently, but today two worlds collide because we are bringing you the long-awaited story of the Telefunken site in West Sayville. More particularly, the story of the decline and fall of the Telefunken site in West Sayville. First, you will hear Connie Currie talking with me about how she came to found the Radio and Television Historical Society, along with some other dedicated, passionate individuals. It is a story of loss in a very large sense, but also of rebirth. It centers around a German transmitting station, one of the earliest and the strongest station to be built on the shores of Long Island. It was consistently reaching Europe while the Marconi company was still trying to perfect that. It's a story that involved Tesla and World War I and a lot of things. And while the Society was not able to save the site, they did save the story. And our second interview on this episode will be with filmmaker Joe Sikorski. He is a documentarian. You may know him from Tower to the People, his documentary on Tesla's lab in Wardenclyffe in Shoreham, Long Island. And he will be talking about his latest film, Invisible Threads, From Wireless to War, which is the story of the Telefunken site and that station. It is produced in conjunction with the Society, the Long Island Radio and Television Historical Society, the Tesla Science Center, funding from the Robert Lyon David Gardner Foundation, input from a lot of other historical societies on the island, and it is being shown for the first time in a special sneak preview this Friday, November 12th at 8 p.m. at the historic Bourne Mansion, Lessing's Bourne Mansion. Tickets are available through teslascience.org. There are still some left. The movie will be shown from 8 to 10 with a Q&A with Joe afterwards, including special guest author and historian Mark Seifer. So if you are interested in Long Island and Long Island history, radio history, please come down and join us for the first showing of Invisible Threads. And now it's my pleasure, on behalf of both podcasts, to bring you the first of today's very special guests.
It all began, I guess you could say, when I was acting as the research historian for the Sayville Historical Society, and I was also researching the local architect, Isaac Green. And in my search of his buildings, I found out from the Suffolk County News way back when that he had designed the transmission building for Telefunken in West Sayville, which was a surprise to me. And I thought, well, is it still there? And I started to call up about it, and I found out, yes, it was there, but it was not going to be there very long because there had been a big to-do about the property that the FAA that was there at the time was leaving.
Well, I'm curious because you've been in Sayville since early 60s or even before that?
I was moving into the house in West Sayville Halloween Day, 1960.
Okay.
Because I was giving out Halloween treats at the same time as we were moving into the house.
So in your memory then, was that a site like you would drive past and say, I wonder what's in that Cherry Avenue site?
Well, no, because you know where it is. It's really in kind of an obscure place. You go from Main Street north on Cherry Avenue, and you pass the school, and you go over the railroad tracks, and it's on your left-hand side. And it's set back, and it has the fence around it, and has been overgrown, I'm sure, around the perimeter for quite a while. So the only thing that the people that lived around it, those few that I've spoken to, have said was that the transmissions loused up their television sets, and that when they left, there was supposed to be some kind of a weather tower there that unfortunately the local inhabitants of the area were quite upset about. And so there was a big thing that went on, and finally there was a law passed in Washington that said that the building and whatever was there was going to be demolished, and the area was going to be turned back into pristine, natural whatever, which I thought was very interesting. So I was young and energetic then, and I started to see what I could find out about it. I got in touch with the, what is their name? They've changed their name since, but it was the preservation group over on the North Shore. And Gloria Van Leeuw, who had done a lot of the canvassing of buildings for a study that was made at the time of all of Long Island's historic buildings. She had actually covered the site. So I talked to her, and she said, look, I'll get somebody to come. We'll get in touch with the FAA, and you can go and look at the buildings. Well, the FAA let me in, and I went with the field man, who was actually quite excited about it because they didn't want to see it lost. They wanted to see it saved. They were very unhappy about the fact that it was going to be destroyed. And he took me to see it. His name was Peter Bishop. Very, very nice person. And I stood there and, I looked at it all, and I asked him, I said, do you know which one is the Telefunken building? And he said, it's that one over there. And I said, where was the tower? And he said, it was there. I said, what's that? And he said, well, that was the Navy's building. And he said, then those were the FAA buildings. And he said, this site is actually now obsolete. But he said it is historic. The piece of property it's a large piece of property, but the buildings were they were near Cherry Avenue, very short walk to get in there to get to the buildings, and the rest of the property was pretty much open property. So, I said to Peter, if somebody could take this and just make this a historic museum, everything is here. There were three antenna fields. There was, I think, two for McKay, and then the FAA, when they put up their two buildings, also put a new field of antennas in the back. But, I said to him, I can't understand why we couldn't see if they wouldn't partition just this one area where the buildings are. Now, the Telefunken company had put in 6 anchors they're still, I think they're still there. They're concrete anchors, 3 large ones that are like fanned out right near the buildings. In fact, right in that area. And then out in the field, way out in the back of the field, there are 3 more. And the guy wires were on there that held up the large tower. So we saw those. He showed me those. So anyway, I started to try to save it. I went to Washington 3 different times. I really learned a lot about Washington. I visited the FAA, who were actually at that time willing to hand me the keys. Frankly, they wanted to get rid of it. That's why they would. I went to see Fish and Wildlife, which was the ones that the government was turning the land over to. And I went to see National Preservation, the people there, and they were 100% behind us. They definitely felt that it was extremely historic and that it should be saved. And they started writing letters. I went to the Smithsonian, made some very nice friends there. A couple of them have since passed away. And then I started to try to get a group together. I was getting groups of people that would come, and the FAA was being very good. They were opening the property and letting me bring people in to see it. Richard Martin with the county, he came with the group, the preservation group, and they looked at the property. But it had several strikes against it. First of all, the people who love preservation, they like pretty turn-of-the-century houses. They like an airfield, a lighthouse. But when it came to industrial buildings with poles all over the place, it turned a lot of people off. Besides which, it was something, and I had to be respectful to this because of myself. Most people knew nothing about this kind of thing. And they looked at it and said, what? What is this? What would we do with it? Well, someone out, I think it was at the Suffolk County Historical Society, Ralph Williams was a member of that. He had a radio museum as part of his house. And I sat down with him, and of course he wanted it right away. He was also, along with 2 other fellows who were ham radio operators, they were actually paying to store quite a number of RCA Radio Central equipment in a barn. And Ralph was very excited to think that maybe we would be able to have the museum and that we would have a large section for Radio Central because he had all of the equipment and Chris had a lot of the equipment. So we were really in very good shape at that time and could have done something.
So was the Isaac Green's building still there?
No, in fact, the Telefunken building was actually built by the Basons, who were Masons, and they did a lot of masonry work for Isaac Green, and they lived in West Sayville, and they did a lot of the Patchogue mill, the lace mill there. They built a lot of that. What happened was that the building, that the kids were setting fire to the buildings and to the wooden buildings. In fact, there was a building there that was like a workshop that had actually come from the Navy base that was down Atlantic and West Avenue there. That's where the Navy base was in World War I, Reserve Navy base. And when that closed, a couple of those buildings that were there, instead of being taken down, they were moved to the radio site. And so that was one of them. And it was really such a nice building. I have pictures that I took of the inside, because what I was doing was every time I went, I took my camera and I was taking pictures of it as it was being destroyed, more or less. But when I was in England, believe it or not, you know when it burned? Guy Fawkes Day. And that was the last day I was in England. And when I came back, Iris, who was the head of the fieldmen, the FAA fieldmen, she called me and she said, well, we lost the nice little building you and I both like. And I said, what happened? She said, oh, it burned on Guy Fawkes Day. And I said, oh. I said, well, that was an appropriate day to set a fire, you know.
So were you pursuing National Register status for that Navy building at the same time?
Oh, yes, because in that building, the Navy Ark building, which was the 1917 building, there were these like troughs or whatever you want to call them, where the wires were and they ran through the building. And Ralph Williams had shown us where the entire electrical history of that site, except for Telefunken, was in that floor.
So
the wires for McKay was there, the wires for the Navy was there, and the FAA was there. So those three, which was really the main number of years for that site, they were all represented there in the floor. So when I showed them in Washington at Preservation that picture, they said right away, that's it. That's it. It has to go on the National Register. So anyway, yes, it was okayed for the National Register, the Navy Ark building. And I got in touch with I think it was AT&T, but I forget now which one, but I got in touch with them about a cell thing on it, you know. And they came and they approved it. And then they said, we're going to do this and that. Is that okay? And I said, oh, yes. And they said, we promise you $1,000 a month. Now, for that place, let's face it, that's a drop in the bucket. But at least it was a step so that we could say, we're trying. You know, I mean, we haven't actually gotten it yet, but we are already putting into place ways where that we would be able to have some sort of steady income. The FAA had been ordered, I believe that was what they said to me, the fieldmen. They had to take everything out of the building. They had to take the electric out. They had to take everything out. And the fire department, one of the fellows there actually said, we'll put a transmitter in there and a receiver at the fire department, and so we can hear what's going on there. Well, that never happened. And it was not long after that. I was to meet the man from AT&T. No, I was to meet the man from Ililco, from the lighting company, because after they were taking everything out, my board decided that they were going to talk to the lighting company and see if they could set up some kind of a temporary hookup so that there would be some electricity in there so that the fire department could put the whatever it was they were going to put in there. Well, when I got there, the fire department was there, the police were there, the town was there already cleaning it up, and there was still smoke and everything there. And, you know, at first I'm looking at all of this, and I couldn't in my mind figure out what had happened at first. And then the man from Lilco came over and he said, "Are you Mrs. Currie?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "I didn't know anything about this." And he said, "Yeah, apparently it happened last night." And I said, "My gosh, that whole building is gone." And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Look, what were they?" And there was these pieces, it was metal, and it was actually melted down, almost like all I could think of was the Wicked Witch of when she gets the water thrown on her. And I looked at that and I said, well, they were the FAA's transmitters. They were great big transmitters. And I said, that fire has got to have been very hot to be able to do that, to melt those transmitters down.
And did you ever hear the determination of how the fire started?
Well, I was told that it was kids that went in there and set the fire. It was set with candles.
So which building actually burned?
The Ark building, the one that would have gone on the National Register.
With the Navy building?
Yeah.
So the Fish and Wildlife owns it now, so it's become...
Well, it was turned over to them, but somebody told me that they turned it over. They didn't turn. I don't think they turned the ownership of it, but they turned over the maintenance to a local group.
So I'm curious. So after the fire and the decision had been made, it was not a site that you could take over. Your group, Chris Bacon, Ralph Williams, what did you decide to do, or how did you, why did you keep going?
Well, as I said, we had started to form a historical society. We made out the paperwork and everything. When the buildings were gone, we had a meeting. We had both a board meeting and a general meeting, as I recall. And, of course, everybody was very disheartened. And a couple of the fellas said, because we had a number of ham radio operators, and a couple of them said, what do we do? Radio Central's gone, this is gone, that's gone. They really don't want us. They're just destroying everything that has anything to do with radio. What do we do? And so Ralph Williams said, well, we're waiting for our charter. Why don't we form the Historical Society, and why don't we try to at least make an effort to have a museum, to put up plaques, and try not to have radio forgotten by the people of Long Island, because it really ran parallel to aviation as far as, what do they call it, a cradle of aviation. I mean, it really was, in a way, a cradle of radio also, because we had the two, Telefunken, which made such great strides in radio. And then we had RCA, Radio Central, and that actually was suggested by the federal government, because up to the time that RCA was formed, all of the radio was from other countries. There was no American. And so they wanted an American company. And when Marconi was preparing to retire, the Marconi company was actually, it became a foundation for RCA. So we really did have we had Tesla alone. And he was not so much radio as he was electricity. But he's been named the father of radio. So Long Island really played a very important part. I mean, many places in the country played important parts in radio, but Long Island, because of the very nature of where it is and of the soil and so forth, it was perfect for radio.
So we are talking with Joe Sikorski, friend of the society. Joe, I first met you when we interviewed you about Tower to the People, which was, I hate to say how many years ago, but and I remember in that meeting, Connie pitching you or telling you the story of Telefunken. Do you remember that day, or do you remember hearing about Telefunken from her?
I do remember that, but I actually remember Connie pitching it earlier than that, when I had actually attended a meeting very early on probably, I think in 2010, it must have been 2009 or 2010, where they were talking about Telefunken, and I attended the meeting because I wanted to talk about the Tesla connection and to see if Tesla could get recognized for his role at Telefunken. And that's when Connie started telling me more about Telefunken. And I think on and off, she would contact me and tell me about it and try to get me to come to meetings, and which I came when I could, because it was really very fascinating stuff and kept hooking me. And I think by the time I came to do the podcast for Tout to the People, I was already hooked.
What made it feasible as a documentary? Like, when you look at a story and say, can I make a film out of this? What elements does it have to have a historical subject for you?
The first thing it needed was context. And when you look at the context, the greater context of what was happening at that time, you had Marconi with a presence on Long Island, you had Tesla with a presence on Long Island, and you had the lead up to a world conflict happening. And this innovation was happening concurrently with these world-changing events. And when you look at that, it just emphasizes the importance of what was happening at Telefunken.
What was the hardest part of, I'm sure it's all hard, but in terms of putting the pieces of the documentary together, the pieces of the story, what was the most challenging part?
There were a lot of challenging parts to putting the documentary together. One was validating a lot of information and going back to source material and rejecting information that was erroneous or incorrect, and trying to put the proper facts in place from original materials. That was one challenging part. Another challenging part was there was so much good information, figuring out what parts you can keep and what parts you needed to lose just for, to fit in the length of a film. But one of the probably most challenging parts, and it's a part that most people are not even going to realize when they're watching the film, is all of the work that went into the imagery, because a lot of these photos were just not good quality. They certainly weren't of the quality that you could project on the screen. So putting these photos through enormous amounts of retouching and restoration and artificial intelligence, and trying to get the pictures formatted correctly so they would display in full detail, that was one of the biggest challenges, and probably took, it was probably responsible for the most time being spent on the documentary, was just working to get these photographs, up to the quality where they can be used in the documentary.
I know we don't want to give too much away, but is there an artifact or a photo that you found that you can kind of tease us with, like that you're excited that you found that you could include, or that excited you in terms of, I can't believe somebody had this? Or
Exactly. Yeah, the most exciting photographs came from the personal collections of people involved in the story, which was another reason why we had such urgency to get the story put together. A lot of the experts are getting older. A lot of the families are spreading out across the country, and to be able to pull some of these materials into an archive and have, a package all together was something that was of utter importance, and to get it done quickly. But throughout that process, there were family members. One was of the family of Ludwig Batterman, provided us with some wonderful photographs of the Telefunken plant during its construction and during its operation. Most of them have never been seen before. So this will be the first time people are seeing them. So I'm very proud of that. And I'm also very proud of, we had the great-grandson of Charles Apgar, who is another hero. There are really two heroes in this story. One is Ludwig Batterman, who was the supervisor of the Telefunken plant, and the other is an amateur radio operator named Charles Apgar. And he helped expose the violations of neutrality that was happening at Telefunken. And Lee Apgar, who is Charles's great-grandson, had some wonderful photos of Charles E. Apgar, including one of him in a tree hanging his antenna, because he really had to improvise. They didn't have tall. He was in a house. He didn't have a giant antenna that he can use to tap into these signals. So he basically strung them in his trees. And I have a photo of him from that collection that is just precious, of Charles Apgar in a tree. So that is one of my favorite photos in the film, as well as virtually all of the ones provided by Dean Batterman, the grandson of Ludwig.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting, it's a whole time period that I don't think people know or have a visual of what these early radio enthusiasts and even transmissions were, in terms of antennas, the wacky things they would have to do to get reception and stringing them through windows and right up trees. And so it's sort of a lost part of the advancement of technology, because now it's so simple that you forget those early growing pains of what it looked like.
Yeah. And I mean, and again, we don't have a lot of the details. Because we took such a broad view of what was happening, there are a lot of things that don't make it into the film. But, what Apgar had to do up in the trees is he ran one long line between two trees, and then he sort of crisscrossed the wires so they got smaller and smaller and kind of funneled down into a central point that would go into his system, because that was the way to receive the strongest signal. So it's just very interesting that these amateurs were, tinkering around and really helping the field to innovate and evolve.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, I've been, with the society, we've been helping you, cheering you on from the sidelines, giving you research where we could. But you chose the narrator, and I think it was an inspired choice. Do you want to say anything about the incredible Tony Todd and the work he did?
Of course. I mean, I just feel that, very, very fortunate that he, I guess, believed in the project enough to voice the narration. He has a very distinct voice. He almost becomes a character in the film because his voice has such character and it has such presence. But mostly it has that underlying tone of there's something going on you don't know about here. It's an underlying tone of something nefarious happening. And most people know him from Candyman and some of the other films he did, but he's a very sought after voiceover actor. In fact, he's playing the role of he's voicing Venom in the new Spider-Man game that is out. It's all the rage. So he is very, very sought after in the field of narration now, and we were just so fortunate to get him for this particular project. I couldn't think of anyone else if he would have said no, other than like a Tom Waits type of voice that I thought would have portrayed the stories. But Tony was first pick, and I was just felt so blessed that he agreed to do it.
Yeah, and it's such a unique choice and for a unique story, because we've talked before. You've said one option is to go with the sort of older white British BBC stereotype of an announcer, but the story is it's Long Island based, but it's early 1900s based also, and it's international. But it's a lot. It's like a time period that hasn't had its breakthrough moment in a sense. So there is no identity to it. So I think picking something such a unique American voice actually adds to it greatly.
Oh, I'm very happy to hear you say that. I felt that, and I hope others agree. The one thing that I think is very important is that it's a compelling story because it's an untold story. It involves Tesla. It involves Marconi. You have pioneers like Armstrong and Braun and Zennick, and all of these people converging on this small little town, West Sayville, Long Island, and it had a world impact on global events.
It's also great that it involves so many voices. So for people that have listened, we've done interviews with Peter Fox Cohallen and Connie Currie and George Munkenbeck. So you've got local people who know the story, or actually in Cohallen's case, connected to the story. And then you have people like Mark Seifer, Mark Raboy, authors who have researched and written some definitive works on Tesla. So again, this story is bringing a lot of elements together. So it's great to see the local history people also on screen next to these renowned experts telling the story. So we are recording this. It's Sunday night. We're going to have a sneak peek at the Bourne Mansion in West Sayville. Actually, it's in Oakdale, but probably would have been within the shadow of the tower because the Telefunken site was maybe a mile away from it. As the filmmaker, this will be the first public showing, so if people can get to it, they'll be among the chosen few. What's going through your mind as you ramp up to actually showing this to the public for the first time?
I'm very excited because I think that the heroism of the small town historical societies are going to be shown, specifically Long Island Radio. But really, there were many, many historical societies that collaborated, but the valiant efforts of Long Island Radio, who tried to save this history, who tried to preserve the Isaac Green building where Telefunken was, and who understood the significance that this place had in world history. This history was almost lost, and thanks to their diligence in preserving this and wanting to tell the story, I am excited for them to get some applause, because this is really their effort, and I am looking forward to them seeing what they worked so hard for be presented to a wider audience, and that's what's making me the most excited.
Great. And we're excited to see the results of your hard work, because I know you've gone above and beyond to get this over the finish line. So no matter what happens Friday, congratulations. It has been great working with you. We'll keep working with you, and we will urge everyone to get out. Everyone within the sound of our voices to get out to Oakdale next Friday and come see the film.
Yeah, if they are interested and don't get to see it now, it won't be available until way into next year. So if it is something that interests you, I encourage you to try to come out and see it and meet some of the heroes that were a part of it.
And again, thank you to Connie and to Joe. I am excited to see this film. I didn't want to mention this before, but if it helps seal the deal, I am also in the film. There's about 40 seconds of me, not in a row, so if you blink, you'll miss it. But it will be an exciting event. Again, November 12th, this coming Friday, 8 p.m., the historic Lessing's Bourne Mansion in Oakdale. Tickets for sale through teslascience.org. Bring a friend, bring your science teacher, your history teacher. We hope to see you there. Our outro music for the Long Island History Project is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. There will also be links in our show notes, longislandhistoryproject.org. So on behalf of Connie and myself, as always, thanks for listening, and this is the Radio Tower signing off.